Good morning. Good to see all of you here this morning, and thankful to be able to be here with you again this morning. For those that are wondering if this is like grandfather time where he sits in a chair and speaks to the grandkids, the reason why I have this chair is I've had some health issues happen over the last couple of months. And I can't stand complete for this long, and the preaching, as you may already have known if you've ever preached before, can be wearing, but it's a little more taxing on me as of right now, so that's why the chair is. I'm just thankful that I have the opportunity to preach again, and I hope that as God continues to heal me and bring me answers to what's going on, that I'll continue to be able to preach and teach more and more. I thank you all for all your prayers. It has been tremendous, and God has answered prayers, and He continues to be good. So thank you for that. I also like to, every once in a while, just encourage all the parents who have young ones here. It is good that they're here. The crying, the gnashing of teeth, the whining, the laughter, that's all good to hear. And so for those of you that have young ones, don't feel pressure from others in here when your kid starts to do whatever they do. We're thankful that you're here with them. I had one kid ask his mother, "Is he done yet?" So sometimes they're just asking the questions that we won't ask, right? So it is good that they're here. So I'm thankful for that. Speaking of kids, we often sing a song to them during VBS and other things where, whatever I may be when I grow up, right? And all the kids are like, "Oh, yeah, I know what that is." And I can distinctly remember some of their answers that sometimes make it difficult to sing the song because it's a long thing that they're saying. And I think that in principle, it's a good song. It's directing them to be Christians first, to put God first, to make sure that He is first in their lives. But I would suggest that there's something else that we might be careful with on how we teach our kids. And that is, whatever I may be when I grow up, well, God has already answered that. God has already answered what we will be and what we are before we've ever really even decided. And sometimes we don't really know that. And so the idea of what we will be, so we're thinking about a professional soccer player, a veterinarian, an astronaut, a rocket scientist, which we have one of those in here. There's various things in which they respond to be. But they're not always going to be that in their life. They're going to do that, but they're not going to be that. Because God has already decided what they're going to be, and He has designed them in who they already are. We may do different things, but we're all the same thing already. And that goes for Christians and non-Christians alike. Because as we pointed out here in Genesis chapter, or as we'll see in Genesis chapter 1, that God in His creation, notice, let me back up here. Notice, does Genesis come before Christianity? Yes. Does Genesis come before Moses? Yep. Does Genesis come before Abraham? Yep. Does Genesis come before Noah? Kind of see where I'm getting at here? When God created humanity, He created us what? In the image and likeness of Himself. Before Christianity, before Judaism, before the covenant that He made with Noah, So when he makes that statement, when that statement is made there in the beginning in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, and then also in verse 27, when he talks about let us create man in our image, guess who that covers? It's all of us. I think sometimes too many of us think and have the idea of it only being found within Christianity. Now, he conforms us more to his image through Christ. And where we are trying to, and I'm getting ahead of myself and already giving you the conclusion of this sermon. So the answer to this young kid was, yeah, he's done. He should be done. We can go home. But I want us in this lesson there's a lot here, and as I was putting this lesson together, I was thinking, oh man, I hope I can get through this. There's a lot here that I want to get through because I want us to show us how much is more. I don't know that we could ever exhaustively study the first couple of chapters of Genesis and conclude everything that we can ever learn from it, because there's so much here. There's purpose here that I don't think that we often see because we get caught up in the what and the how and not the why. So follow me here as we go through some things here that I want us to see. In Genesis chapter 1, we notice one of the first things that describes what's going on is that it's formless and void, some of translations. Some will say empty, that it's formless and empty. And so this kind of proposes maybe not the issue or the thing that's set before us that God is going to correct, that he's going to bring order from disorder. And so there's things that are without form, and there's things that are yet unfilled. And so the first thing he's going to have to do here is form it. And we're going to see that in day 1, 2, and 3. That form, that shape is going to take hold of what? And there's purpose behind this. You know, we sing the song, you know, the kids know day one, right? You know, a lot of the kids know those songs, but we don't always see the relationship to it and why. So in day 1, we have light. Let there be light. Right? Let there be light. And there was separation from light and darkness. And so this is the beginning of this first formation or domain, if you will, or realm. That there's purpose behind this. That this is going to be day 1. We look at this, okay, great, light, day 1. This is what's happening. We don't quite understand where's the light coming from. If God thought we needed to know that, he would have told us. Okay? But we can still find that there's reason behind it. Okay, there's reason behind it. There needs to be a place for something to reside in a formed place, a formed realm, in order for something else, as we'll discover later, resides there. Day 2, we have the skies separated from the water. So now we have the skies. Now we have something that's separated from water. We have light separated from darkness. We have skies separated from water. Again, the formless is being formed. The formless is being formed. Looked at day 3. Dry land separated from water. The sky separated from water. Now you have, going even further, you have the dry land that's separated from water. Again, that which is formless is being formed. Well, why are these things being formed here now? Why day 1, day 2, day 3? Why are these things all here in the first instance? You see, a lot of the ancient way of looking at creation was not necessarily how God or the gods did it, but why they did it. In our culture, how he, which is not to say that he doesn't speak the how, he speaks it into existence. He speaks it into existence. But we have a lot of argument and debate about that, and that's not to say that those things aren't worth looking at, but in all of that debate and the argument of how, we miss the why. And so we have the formless. So notice what we're going to have next then. Now we have the filled. Because the problem was it was the formless and the void, the without form and the emptiness. And so day 1, day 2, day 3 of the form that was needed. The disorder needed to be made into order. The chaotic, the now in the form. And so day 1, what was day 1? Day 1 was light, separated from darkness. Well, guess what? The sun and the moon and the stars needed a place, a realm, a formed place to inhabit, to be able to be caught up in, to be placed, to have, we in the science of things, we look at all the gravity and all of those things, and those things we can find in the Bible. But that's not the purpose. The purpose is God formed this thing in order for the sun and the moon and the stars to have a place in which to habit, in which to live, in which to, as he says in verse 14, to rule. We're going to get into that in just a second here. Sun, moon, and the stars are in there for the light that was separated from the darkness. In day 5, what did he separate? He separated the skies from the what? From the water. Well, what happens in day 5? Day 2, he builds a realm. He forms the formless in order for it to be filled with that is which is going to fill the skies and the water, the birds and the fish. He talks about the gray sea serpents as well, which is, there's so much. Go through and read Genesis and then reread Genesis chapter 1 into the first few verses of chapter 2 and then reread it again. There's so much found in there. Day 6, guess what happened in day 6? So now what happened in day 3? He separated dry land from the water. Why was that needed? In order for the land animals and humanity to live. The formless and the empty became the formed and the filled. Purpose behind that which needed to be in order for that which was filling it to be able to live. And so then we look at purpose. And I've talked about this a little bit, but day 1 and 4, talking about lightness separated from the darkness. Chapter 1, he speaks to the idea that the sun and the moon are going to rule over the day and the night. And the only other time he talks about the ruling over is in relation to whom? Do you know? Into humanity ruling over creation. The fish, the birds, and the animals that are on the land. And so the sun and the moon rule over the days. And in verse 14, it designates years. It designates weeks. It designates a calendar. It designates a lot of what will be. Remember, this is in Genesis, but this Jewish festival doesn't start until when? Some thousands of years later. But God already had purpose behind it. The 7 days of the week that we kind of look at as, oh, Monday is horrible. Friday is the best. Our culture doesn't quite understand the significance of the 7 days, but God was putting purpose into it. And that we now are given also through this, we're giving culture. We're given culture. We're given time. We're given understanding of how we live according to that which is formed. Day 2 and 5, where he talks about the sky separated from the water, we're given how we live within the sky, the atmosphere, how the water, the sea animals live within the water. There is designated space in order. how water and air work together. You ever study in relation to God together? Whenever you kids study the cycle of water, your science classes in environmental science and biology and those things, you're going to study the cycle of water and how the atmosphere and the water and the land and how they all work together. Guess when this was coming together? I want you to be thinking about God when you're taught that, because it's God who put that into existence out of the formless and the empty. Day 3 and 6 then correlate. And then all the vegetation, all those things and animals were put there where the sky or the water was separated from the land in order for us to have a place to live. This is God creating order out of disorder. Sometimes we look at this life and we think how chaotic it is, and truly don't understand how much more chaotic it would actually be without what God put into place in the beginning. In the beginning, it gives us purpose. It gives us the why. God would go on to say to humanity, be fruitful and multiply and rule over that which I have created for you to do so. That's a responsibility not just to Christians, not just to Judaism. And so sometimes I think we get too defensive when people who don't genuinely believe in God, but do believe in taking care of this earth. And we think that's ridiculous. God is taking care of this earth. God is in control, and yes, He is. But God told us to take care of that which we've created, hasn't He not? We need to start, church, we need to start seeing more of the image of God displayed in people than we do, because we're missing it. It's there. Even if they don't believe in God, we can still praise God for some of the things that they're doing that represent the image of God. Are there things that they're doing wrong? Yes. But are there things that we're doing wrong? Most assuredly. The difference is we have Christ. And that's what we want to share with them. This is about the time where I should say, okay, James, you're good. But to answer the little kid's question, I'm not done yet. I want us to notice something here that I think brings more perfection to Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 than maybe we realize. So I want us to notice some of the words that are found in here. And if you've ever been a student of the Bible, you'll notice that there are certain numbers that God uses repeatedly to describe things and to define things and to put certain things on it. And so God not only defines the purpose and the reason for things and the why of things, but He also uses the amount of number of words for reason as well. Into the ancient world, it is significant. It is significant, more than we can really ascertain to it. We might look at, we usually look at a couple of different numbers in our life, maybe a third one, that are pretty prevalent still maybe in our culture. And that is what? The number 7, right? Which has taken on a number beyond that God has used it for. It's lucky number 7, right? And where do we use lucky number 7? If anybody you know, then you're also indicting yourself at the same time, right? Right? It's lucky number 7. That's what you bet on, right? When you go to Vegas. Who's been to Vegas to bet on number 7? All right, and then of course, lucky number 13. Right? Those have taken on more superstitious ways of thinking rather than spiritual and biblical ways of thinking. And the only other number that we might often look at or see is then 666, right? It's the mark of the beast that we find in Revelation. And brethren, we use that number far too much and far beyond what God ever intended to be used. We got to be careful with that number. We got to look at Revelation as it's supposed to in the context of how it's used. That it's not a literal thing that we go out and look and find. Oh my goodness, I'm on page 666 of this book that I'm reading. I better not read it. We do it though. I better not live on the 13th level of a building. And because of it, guess what we have tried to do? We live on the 12th floor, and then where do we go? 14th. But guess what? No matter what you call it, I'm sorry, but the 14th floor, whether you call it the 13th floor or not, it's the 13th floor. We live too much in the superstitious world to be called Christians. So, let's look at this. Now I'm going to have to. God said in this text in Genesis chapter 1 through about Genesis chapter 2, verse 3. Remember that it's hundreds of years, thousands of years later, hundreds of years later in some places where the dividing of the books of the Bible and the verses come. And so Genesis 2 is not where God is kind of starting over. Genesis 2 verse 1 is where he talks about the seventh day. So don't stop at the sixth day, brethren. Keep reading because the conclusion doesn't stop until about verse 3. And then he kind of starts, recounting the creation. So God said it's used 3 times for humans and 7 times for the vegetation, for creation, for everything else. And guess those two numbers add up to number 10. If you've ever studied the number 3, you will note that the number 3 usually is talking about God. It is a word or a number used to talk about the divinity of God. It's God's stamp on things, but it also includes the idea of perfection. Well, if you've studied number 7, guess what number 7 also includes its understanding and definition? Perfection, spiritual perfection, completion. Guess what number 10 also entails in its definition when you see throughout the Bible? Completion, perfection. To be complete. So when God said 3 times in talking to humanity, and God said in 7 times in referring to everything else, it was perfected divinely in all ways possible. To the ancient world, that would be astounding. To make that connection and to see that connection, that not only God formed from the formless and filled from the empty, but he did it perfectly, and those numbers are going to suggest to that ancient culture that that's exactly what he did. And we don't want to miss that. This is intentional, that God did this. Look at the next thing. After their kind is used 10 times in referring to the vegetation and referring to the birds, fish, the animal, the beast, the cattle, all of those things 10 times after their kind. Blessed, he uses 3 times because God blessed creation. It's interesting. It says God blessed at the beginning, and then he says God blessed, and he talks about the great sea serpent. And then he says God blessed with respect to humanity. Interesting, that's a whole nother lesson to try to delve into to figure out those 3 places in which God blessed there. And then the word create is used 3 times with its last occurrence in the same verse, which we're going to talk to in just a little bit, because we're getting close to the end in answer to your question. Occurs 3 times within the same verse. That's significance. We're going to talk about that in a second. And it was so is used 7 times. Again, all these things, perfection, completeness, divinely stamped by God, all found in the beginning of Genesis. And then if we just read with our Western eyes, we miss this. And we miss the significance of this divine perfection that we have been handed, that we have been given, that we have been blessed with. And then also, and God saw that it was good, including very good, being the 7th time. 7 times God saw that it was good. This, from a biblical student, when you see this, like, this is the stuff where you nerd out on, right? You get excited, you're like, dude, this is so awesome. This is so cool to just see this. To see, yeah, we know that God created it, but he did it perfectly. Yeah, we know that he did it perfectly. Yeah, but he left us little things for us to find and discover intentionally to go, yeah, he did it so perfectly. He did it so perfectly. So, last couple of things here, and I hope that you're still with me. I want to zoom in on a couple of 2 things there. After their kind. 10 times that's talked about. This is only in reference to the vegetation in animals. Isn't that interesting? After its kind is only in reference to vegetation and the animals that created that. Their kind is only in reference to that. What's different is it changes with Adam and Eve. Let us make mankind not after their own kind, but that they're going to be fruitful and multiply after their own kind, but in our image. There's a difference between how he describes and speaks of humanity versus vegetation in the animal kingdom. After their own kind only refers to animals in animals. And the second thing that I want to zoom in on is the word create. As I said 3 times, the last occurrence is in 3 times, which is in chapter 1, verse 27, where it said God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. In male and female, he created them. This verse deserves its own lesson in its own, because there's a lot more going on here than I think that we truly understand and realize. But when I point it out, is used 3 times. And that word created man, that first man there, is the word and the idea of mankind or humanity. Okay, he created humanity. Humanity, he created them. Guess what in the end there he says? Male and female. But God's use of the word, or 3 times there, is significant because it's divinely stamped on the creation of humanity. And so the way of describing the creation connects creation, what I mean is vegetation and animals, connects them to their land, to their kind. The way we are described connects us to God. Because there's a relationship to God that is only there with humanity. Is only there with humanity. God wanted us to see that in the way that he created us. It would have been easy for God to just say, and he created humanity, and leave it at that. But God wanted to impress upon us at the very beginning that there was a relationship to us that was unlike the relationship to the rest of creation. And I know that we all know that, but here is yet another way in which he wants us to see that. God, or brethren, we're special. We're special, not with the things that we will be, but with that which we already are. That's what we need to teach our children. Not to be so caught up in what you're going to be and what you're going to study in college and how you're going to make a living, but to focus and study on what God has already made you to be and who you are. How much of an image problem does our culture have right now, people? It's because we're confused as to who we are. And God already expresses value from the beginning in Genesis, and it's not by mistake. I'll leave you with last thing. In the beginning, God saw that all that he had made, and behold, and it was very good. We are very good because God created us in his image. That's who we are. God wanted us to see that. And that's just in the first chapter and a half. Wow. And this is when the church says, Amen. Genesis chapter 1 establishes all this, brethren. And that's how we know that the Bible is written by inspired men of God. Not by one of the things that my professor used to always say is a bunch of good old Jewish boys hanging around a campfire talking. It's God inspired. You can't see that and not be impressed with the awesomeness that God has in his. So yes, read your Bibles. Because there's so much more to how you are valued and who you are that's there that is far more important than where you're looking for it out here. We're going to be led in a song here in a moment, and I hope that you will dwell on these things, go back and reread these things, and to look at these things that God has pointed out in his perfection, how and why he has created us, and start looking at yourself with God's lenses and not the mirror or anybody else. And you will see the value that he placed on you and how much more value he placed on you when he gave his only begotten Son to die for you, to shed his blood and to give his blood freely, so that we could be cleansed and completely conformed to his image, so that we could stand before him one day holy and blameless forever. Let us stand and let us sing.